Hi everyone, this is Sally Fowler, the owner and trainer for Disabled Advantage Dog Training and Consulting. Thank you for joining me on my Patreon tier Service Dog Questions Answered. This post is about dealing with the loss of a service dog, and I've already done this post once. I did the audio for it a few weeks ago, and then I thought more about what I really wanted to say and about what I felt like people needed to hear, and so I'm redoing it. Dealing with the loss of a service dog is going to be a unique experience no matter what. So you can listen to my advice and you can listen to my experience and the things that I did that helped me, and then you may still find things are completely different for you. Things that helped me are you don't relate to them whatsoever and you don't think they would be helpful, or your experience is totally different from mine and so my advice is unhelpful, or maybe you think I have great advice but you're just so mad at the world that you can't hear it right now and you need to listen to it later, which is also perfectly fine. There are different ways to lose a service dog. So if you're listening to this and your service dog is laying happily by your side, everything's fine, you're just listening to this to prepare yourself for the one day down the road, that might be something that is happening, or you might be going through the loss yourself. I'm not going to talk about losing Robbie directly because that's just really hard and really crappy to talk about. It triggers a massive pain flare for me. And if you're going through this loss yourself, it's honestly not super helpful for you to hear how sad I was. It's more helpful for you to hear ideas for handling it and moving forward. But there are two different ways to lose a service dog, or there's three different ways to lose a service dog. So one is by rehoming it, where the dog is still alive, but they're no longer in your life. Another is by the dog suddenly coming down with something and having to be put down and passing away. And the third one is the dog ages out and maybe they develop a medical condition that they die from naturally, or they die naturally from old age. So this post is focusing more on the actual death of a service dog as opposed to rehoming it and losing it that way. Robbie was a surprise loss. He was fine one day and then the next day he wasn't, and then we decided to put him down because we didn't want to put him through a surgery that wouldn't help. The problem would have just reoccurred in a few months later, and also Robbie was a very lively dog, and so the thought of putting him through a bunch of crate rest and rehab was just not in his best interest as a between 8 and 9-year-old dog. The first thing that I wasn't really prepared for, aside from, the obvious, was that to me, in my world, Robbie was everything. He was, my husband and I used to joke that Robbie was as much a life partner as my husband was. And so when I lost Robbie, it felt like I'd lost a spouse, not a dog. And a lot of people in my life didn't understand that that was the depth of grief that I was going through. To most people in my life, even people who understood what his function was and knew how much he helped me, most people in my life, I lost a dog. And I lost a member of the family. But I lost a member of the family in the sense of, like, everyone's dog is a member of the family, not like I lost my spouse kind of grief. And so a lot of people didn't show up for me. And that was really, really hurtful, and it added to the grief that I was going through. And it was something that I wasn't expecting. Like, I grew up in the South where if you lost a family member, everybody showed up. Like, everybody. People brought casseroles, people offered to help clean your house, people would travel out to come see you or stay with you for a week and help you get things accomplished. People would call you and be like, hey, I don't know how to help you. What can I do? And that's what I was expecting when I lost Robbie, and none of that happened. And so that was a second layer of emotional trauma that I still don't think most people in my life are really aware of, that happened to me. I don't have great advice for you on how to navigate that if that's how your family and friends respond to the loss of your service dog. If you have the energy, directly ask for things. Say, hey, we need help. Can you please bring us dinner? Or can you please come wash the dishes? Because here's the thing. When you lose a service dog, you're not just losing a dog for a lot of reasons. But the most simple answer to tell people is that the service dog is what kept you functional. What kept you functional is what kept your lifeboat of you and your spouse, and if you have children, kept that lifeboat functional. And your service dog helping you and keeping you healthier and keeping you safer and keeping you more functional decreased the stress levels of your friends and close family from worrying about you all the time, because they knew the service dog had you. You were taken care of. Not a problem. And you had more energy to put back into your lifeboat. So everything was balanced. It may not have been perfect, but it was a working system. When you take the service dog out of that system, your boat is suddenly sinking. Your husband or partner is suddenly going to be very stressed and very worried about you. They lost a close companion in their life, and they're suddenly more worried about you because they see how much grief you're going through, and they love you, so they're going to worry about you. They also now know that you have a void where you were getting medical care. Service dog is a medical assistive device, so that dog was helping you function. That dog was keeping you safe with your medical condition, and that's now gone. So that level of assistance that you had is now gone, and it either needs to be filled by someone in your family, or you're just sort of stuck treading water until you're able to get back on stable ground somehow, which is usually training your second service dog or being placed with a second service dog. And that puts more stress on the entire system. You're less likely to be able to help with household chores, hobbies, fun events with your family and loved ones, and your loved ones are worrying about you more, and they're having to do more of the workload, and they're watching you grieve. They aren't sure how long to let you grieve and when to tell you, hey, let's get up and go do something else now. And the whole system is in complete chaos, and people don't realize that. So you need to find a way to explain that to them. And if what you do is you tell them to sign up for my Patreon and they listen to just this question for 1 month and then they go on their way, do that. Please share this link. I will explain it to them with those exact words. They can listen to me because I have gone through this now. After we lost Robbie, our boat had a ton of holes in it and it was sinking, and we were treading water and we were training the successor dog all at the same time. It was super hard. My husband suddenly lost the support that he had of me being able to help with dishes and laundry and miscellaneous things around the house. and animal care. Primarily, I'm the one that's always taking care of both dogs and the rabbits. And so when I was going through the grief of losing Robbie, I kept training Austin and I kept up a skeleton routine of taking care of Austin, but Adam did have to step in and do a little bit more with Austin because I just didn't have the physical or emotional energy to do it. There were also more times that he had to take care of the rabbits because I just didn't have it in me. And that was one extra thing added to his plate. He was responsible for doing all of the dinners. He was responsible for doing all of the dishes, all of the laundry. Like, everything fell on this man's shoulders. And he's a farmer. He worked 10-hour days. And so he'd have to spend 10 hours at work worrying if I was okay during the day because I didn't have a service dog helping me anymore. And then knowing that he had to come home and do a crap ton more stuff on top of his heavy job. And that existed. Our boat had holes in it for months. It took me several months to recover and get back to some state of normal after losing Robbie. And even then, there were still difficult times because that's how grief goes. But in that first month, if we'd had more people who had been like, hey, I signed you up for HelloFresh or whatever food delivery service meal kit thing. Hey, I'm going to come over and do your dishes every Wednesday. Or, hey, I took a week off of work. I'm flying out to stay with you guys or stay near you guys for a week so that I'm here to help with chores or meals or whatever you guys need help with. That level of support is what we needed, and it's not what we had. We had one or two people who were helpful, and that was it. And I have more family than that, and they just didn't show up. They saw it as I lost a dog. And so that was really hurtful and really hard. So come up with a plan now of like, okay, if let's say your service dog is fine, come up with a plan of if my service dog was gone tomorrow, what are the biggest things that our family would struggle with? And be prepared, write those down. Be prepared to just give that as a list to people. Be like, hey, if our boat suddenly gets a lot of holes in it, this is exactly how you can help. Because you may or may not have the emotional energy to ask for things. And as a disabled individual, I know it's really hard to ask for help on a good day, let alone a day where you feel like your whole world is ending. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you want to try and do things that are going to help you find closure. And closure is going to look different for different people. I did several different things. The ER vet made us a paw imprint of Robbie's foot, which was really nice. We keep that on a shelf in our house beside a photo of him and his dog tags. We kept his dog tags. We ended up turning his collar into Austin's collar because it was higher quality material, but we did keep his tags. So we have kind of a little Robbie shelf. We took down his crate the day we put him down, and cleaned up and rearranged the house and put, like, if his favorite dog bed was in the bedroom, we moved it to the living room just so that the house looked different, so that my brain wasn't expecting him as much to be in a specific spot. We put some of his gear away, and it took us an entire year, I am sad to say, to get a memorial corner made for Robbie. And it mostly just took a year because life kept happening, and it wasn't that it wasn't important to us, it's just life kept happening, and it was really hard to have that closure because it meant he was gone. And that's one of the hardest things about losing someone important to you, is that part where you admit that they're gone. I knew from the beginning that I wanted him buried somewhere close. We had agreed a long time ago that we would have him buried on the family farm. And when he passed away, we asked my mother-in-law if we could bury him under the apple trees, because Robbie loved apples so much, and she immediately agreed that that was the perfect spot for him. And so he's buried somewhere close. That was something that was really important to me, so that I could visit him. And I don't visit him as much anymore, but that first year I did go visit him, and I would go talk to him and hang out with him for a little bit. One thing that I really wanted to do was, to me, so Robbie was my first service dog, and one thing that I kept telling myself to help me keep pushing and keep coping in the days following the loss of him was that he gave his life for me. His entire adult life was spent learning how to work with me and then working with me to give me a better quality of life. And so I needed to hang on to this life because he gave me his entire life. And I wanted to honor that level of dedication somehow. And what came to mind are, I really like watching fire and rescue shows. And so what came to mind are when you lose someone in the line of duty, they often memorialize them with a shadow box, or they save their badges. And I wanted to do something similar. So we took apart Robbie's work vest. It was too small for Austin, and so we weren't going to be able to use it anyways. We took it apart and laid it out flat and pinned it up in a shadow box that we framed and put on the wall. And so it's like a badge of honor for my service dog that's hanging up in the corner, and something I can look at every day and remember what he did and remember what he and I were able to accomplish together. And that gave me a little bit more hope. And it also gave me more closure for seeing his vest on the wall as opposed to seeing his vest on the gear rack with the rest of the dog equipment. We also ordered several nice prints of our favorite photos of Robbie. This was a project that took the longest to do because I wanted it to be something my husband and I did together. But often for the first few months, it just got so overwhelming to look at photos of him and not have him anymore that it was a very slow process. We finally landed on 50 favorite photos, which is a lot of photos. And I ordered, I think, 25 for the first time around. And we bought a 3-photo frame to hang up beside the shadow box or adjacent to it. And our plan is to every now and then we're going to rotate the photos through so that we get different views of Robbie. And the first ones we hung up were some of our favorite Robbie faces, so that he's always with us in that sense. Another thing that we did that helped us bring closure was, well, 2 things. The first thing was when we buried Robbie, we made a point to let Austin smell Robbie's body. I've been working with animals for most of my life now, and social animals have a harder time accepting the loss of a friend if that friend just suddenly disappears. When you allow dogs, horses, and cattle to smell the body of their herd mate or pack mate who's passed away, they tend to accept the death easier. They don't develop depression, or other behavioral problems. And it helps them accept it and helps them understand as well. And it may sound silly, but it is something that I've seen in practice, and I've seen that it does help more times than for me to be able to brush it off as being silly. So we let Austin smell Robbie, and he sniffed him over really thoroughly and tried nose nudging him a few times. But when Robbie didn't move, Austin just whined and then laid back down. And Austin kind of moped around the house for a day or two looking for Robbie. There were a few times where we found him laying near one of Robbie's favorite dog beds, but not on it. And then with time, he stopped looking for him, like within about 1 or 2 weeks. And so I think allowing him that closure was helpful for him, and it was helpful for me as well. Another thing that we did regarding Robbie's gravesite is my mother-in-law got me one of those headstone kits that are, I think they're intended for kids, but you pour out some sort of ceramic or clay type base into a mold, and then you have these foam letters that you impress, and then you can paint in the engraving. And it felt really silly and it felt really childish at the time, but there was something very peaceful about making the headstone, and it was incredibly thoughtful of her to get a marker for him. And I had a hard time making it because I needed help because it was heavy, and she was ready to be there and help me make it in any way that I needed. At one point, my hands started shaking so hard that it was really hard to paint in the letters for it, and so she helped me paint in the letters when my hands failed. And like, not once did she make me feel childish. She thought it would be a good way for me to have closure, and also to honor his memory by giving him a marker in the yard. And it wasn't something that she'd done for any of her kids' animals that had passed away, so it was something that was very special and very unique to Robbie, and that felt even more important. And it's, you know, it's a cheap headstone, so it's actually pretty faded by now, 2 years later, but it was the thought that counted, and it was the action that was good for me, making it and then setting it. And it's also now a remembrance. It's a place we can go. She also ended up later in the season, she planted wildflowers around it. And so every time she's out there working on the apple trees, she also gets to remember Robbie as well. And it's pretty funny, the cats like hanging out underneath the apple tree, and so we have photos of the cats laying in the flowers by the headstone. And it's just such a fitting remembrance of him because he loved eating apples. And one of his closest friends was a barn cat, and he was the dog who would stop to smell the flowers. That was his personality. And so it was just all of those little things brought me more closure over losing him than if I had done nothing. Getting through the loss of him was less of a we're gonna do this kind of activity and more of a day by day, moment by moment deal. I'd say it took me about 2 months solid. I do not recommend looking for or getting a dog right after you lose your service dog, if you don't already have a second dog lined up in training, I recommend waiting until your head is clear and you're able to look for a dog more objectively. If you're not able to look for a dog objectively, please hire me to help you do it, because it's really easy to pick the wrong dog because you're still so overwhelmed with emotion, and looking for a service dog needs to be a hypercritical decision. I already had Austin, so I focused on doing the bare necessities with him, training him. I kind of broke my day into two parts. Part one was training Austin and playing with Austin, and anytime I got out of bed to work with Austin, my Austin switch and my trainer switch was flipped on, and I just blocked out Robbie as much as possible. And then part two was getting in bed and watching TV and movies and letting myself cry and be sad about Robbie. And at that point, the Austin switch got flipped off and the sadness switch got flipped on. Not to say I wasn't training Austin at that time, but when I was in bed resting, I either had Austin in his crate, or I had him in place, or I had him on a leash that I was holding while I laid in bed, or like tucked into the side of the bed so that he was tethered to me, so that he was learning that if I'm in bed, it's calm time. But that I wasn't having to actively work with him, and I was getting breaks during the day to rest and feel all of my feelings. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you have a condition that's affected by stress, this level of grief is going to cause a massive uptick in symptoms for you, and also the symptoms that are more infrequent for you are going to become very frequent for you. So be prepared with, have easy things you can eat for meals, have easy snacks ready, let your friends know ahead of time, or just have friends who are psychic like I do. I have two of them, they're awesome, who text you and make sure that you're alive and that you've eaten something and that you're okay, and that they don't need to come over and check on you, or that they are gonna come over and check on you whether you want them to or not. And just give yourself time, because no one can tell you how much time it takes to recover from this kind of loss, and no one can tell you how to grieve. I got kind of forced into laying in bed crying a lot, watching TV, because my CRPS made my pain so high that it was very, very difficult to function, period. But that was also what my body needed. I will say that after about 2 weeks of me just constantly flipping through photos and videos of Robbie, my husband did intervene and say, hey, let's take a break from looking at photos of him for a while. And it sounds really harsh, but it was actually the kind of intervention I needed, because when you fall into that hole of just constantly looking at photos over and over again, you're not really moving forward, you're staying in the past with the memory, and that can almost be worse for you. So let yourself do it for 1 to 2 weeks, but then either have the own personal mental willpower to stop doing it, or have somebody in place in your life who's going to step up and say, hey, let's take a break from this and let's do this instead. And I love my husband for doing that, because that was absolutely what my mind needed. And remember what your service dog gave you. Remember what they did for you. And remember that the point of working with a service dog is to keep moving forward in your life. It's to keep going. And so even when we lose a service dog, the point in life, the point of their life was for us to keep going. And so the point needs to be finding a way to keep going. And what that looks like in the short term is very different from what that looks like in the long term. But in the long term, If working with a service dog was a really good fit for you and it was what brought you stability to your life, it may need to be something that you need to consider continuing and looking at how are you going to partner with your second service dog or train your second service dog and how you're going to make that happen. If you're going through the loss of a service dog and you need someone to talk to, please set up a consultation with me. If you're interested in looking for a dog to train as a service dog for yourself, and you're maybe you have lost a service dog recently and you're ready to start this process, or you know you're not ready but you want to go ahead and start talking about looking for another dog, set up a consultation with me. I do recommend signing up for either a 90-minute or a 3-hour consultation, just because there's so much more to talk through and figure out than a 30-minute consult slot allows for. If you're going through the loss of a service dog right now, know that I'm familiar with what that loss feels like. Your loss feels different than my loss did, because we're all unique and our teams are unique. But you're not alone in what you're going through, and it will be okay. Even if it doesn't feel like it today or tomorrow, one day you'll be okay again. One day you'll feel safe again. One day you'll feel like you can take on the world again. And it's okay if that day isn't anytime soon, but it will happen. You will get back your sense of safety and your sense of peace and functionality somehow. I got it back by training Austin. And if that's the option for you, great. If you need help, please reach out. Thank you for listening.